In humans, male expendability is defined as society's willingness to sacrifice the health, well being, and lives of males to serve its interests and keep itself safe from outside predation and attack. Male expendability is something that's always sort of hung in the air. It's always something I've been passively aware of. It was really big in the 1910s. Women and children first was the policy that was implemented on the Titanic.
Women and children first. Yeah.
This same archaic chivalry was one of the main motivating factors in the Jim Crow South for white men to lynch black men. Well, then there was the First World War, where the worth of male life was reduced to nothing and the entire male population was relegated to just being an expendable military resource collectively. But that was all over a century ago. We're supposed to know better now, right? We're supposed to. Like, chivalry is supposed to be dead, right? And good riddance to it. But when Vladimir Putin launched an invasion into Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky responded by enacting a sex-selective martial law that locked all male citizens between the ages of 18 and 60 in the country. And my immediate reaction upon hearing that was like, you can't fucking do that. You can't fucking do that in the 21st century. I can understand why people would operate on these horrific gender roles 100 years ago because it was a backwards ass time of cholera and unwiped ass cracks. But we're supposed to know better now. And you can call me a Russian asset all you want. I've heard it all. I've been very vocal on TikTok about how opposed I am to this martial law, how cruel it is, how it shouldn't exist, and how Zelensky is a piece of shit for compiling onto the misery of the Ukrainian people by implementing it. I don't need to be paid by Putin to oppose male expendability. I'll gladly do that shit for free. I'm not incentivized by the Russian war effort. I'm incentivized by my basic human fucking empathy. I'm incentivized by just imagining how horrific that would be if I were in that situation. If I was fleeing the country with my family, but when we made it to the border, they told us I had to fucking stay. But my female relatives, their lives and safety matter more than mine, so they can pass the border they can seek refugee status, but I'm not fucking worthy of that because I was born with a dick. What's even more frustrating is like how little public dissent there is. I mean, I know that more than half the population of Ukraine is against this. The fact that anyone is for it at all is quite frankly fucking appalling. Most news articles that mention it only mention it like in passing. They don't challenge it. There are a few articles outright denouncing it. Most of the Western media is just peddling pro-Ukraine fluff and dick-riding Zelensky in spite of the fact that he's playing fascist dictator in the midst of all of this. He's been stifling and quashing left-wing opposition parties and also cozying up to far-right neo-Nazi organizations like the Azov Battalion. When you recognize the link between Ukrainian nationalists like Zelensky with fascism, this adherence to chivalric gender roles suddenly starts to make a lot more sense. Benito Mussolini said, "War is to men as maternity is to women." And like a true fascist, he was dead fucking wrong. War is not to men as maternity is to women. Paternity is to men as maternity is to women. This is from one of the few articles sympathetic to the plight of Ukrainian men, A Prayer for Women and Children and Men by Robin Javon. There's a heart-wrenching sadness to this familiar command which places women alongside children in times of peril and pushes men off in the distance, as if they are a separate and expendable branch on the family tree. It puts space between men and their offspring at precisely the time when it would seem they'd want to keep them close. It demands that men sublimate any ferocious instinct to protect their child and instead turn their attention to battle for country and creed. It's an order that magnifies the man as warrior trope, which is a part of the devastating psychology of violence that fuels so many altercations, from street corner brawls to frontline combat. Men fight, women nurture. Men defend, women are protected, at least some of them are. This is from another article titled Civilian Men Are Trapped in Ukraine by Charlie Carpenter. As a conflict researcher who recently spent time assisting with the humanitarian effort and reporting from the Poland Ukraine border, I've been hearing from young civilian men in Ukraine for months, with some reaching out to me via anonymous Twitter accounts. Even before this proclamation, they felt terrified and desperate. One young man hiding out in Lviv, Ukraine, whom I'll call Andriy, asked me to share his story, but was afraid to use his real name. Andriy is separated from his mother, sister, and fiancée when they fled to London, and he was forced to stay behind. My fiance and sick mother need me abroad so that I can work and help them. Now I can't even help myself. I am left alone with strangers and without a home and cannot leave the country, he said. My friends and I have no experience and we do not want to hold weapons and cannot physically fight. I live in fear they will send me to war without proper training. My friends were trained for 5 days and sent to Donetsk. I'm worried about the men in this country. Many others are worse off than me. Voices like Andriy's reflect a gender dimension of the Ukraine war seldom covered by the Western media. Civilian men separated from their families at the border, vulnerable to conscription but not actually being trained for war, and sitting helpless, hopeless, and without their loved ones. A bit further down in the article, others say it is an issue of the fundamental human rights of freedom of movement and gender equality among civilians. One respondent wrote on the Human Security Lab survey, "We live in a modern world. Men and women must have equal rights, the right to choose," another wrote. "This law needs to be changed because not only women can take care of children and not only men can join the army." Preventing civilian men from fleeing with their families complicates the protection of women and children as well, however. When women and children flee alone, being separated from their male relatives makes them vulnerable to trafficking and heightens their economic and psychosocial stress. Families make agonizing choices in such situations. In late March, a young woman named Valentina, whose family name and that of her husband's I've chosen not to use out of concern for their safety, arrived at the Ukraine border 9 months pregnant, on foot, and alone with just one pink suitcase. She was one of several refugees who joined my group's van while I was in the region, shuttling those in flight from the border to the train station in Warsaw, Poland. Valentina had left not only her husband behind, but also her 4-year-old son, whom she left in her husband's care because "I don't think I could travel 9 months pregnant and take care of my child as well, without my husband with me." Valentina made her way to Amsterdam to give birth in a safe place, while her husband and son hid in the western Ukrainian mountains to avoid the risk of shelling or conscription. Yeah, I like that last bit there, getting the point across that you're no fucking safer from the Ukrainian authorities than you are from the Russians. University of Munster doctoral candidate Piolata Storff, like that name, points out that both civilian men and women as yet unconscripted into the armed forces remain civilians and as such should arguably retain all of the mobility rights to other war-affected civilians under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and related treaties, such as the Refugee Convention. If civilian protection organizations such as PAX, Human Rights Watch, and the International Committee of the Red Cross and the Center for Civilians in Conflict are looking for a specific request to bring to the Ukrainian government, perhaps this would be it, to allow freedom of movement and humanitarian access for all civilians without discrimination on the basis of gender. Exactly, this is the 2020s, it is not the 1910s. Male expendability and chivalry have no business persisting into this time period.
You still think it's beautiful and sweet to die for your country, don't you? Well, we used to think you knew. The first bombardment taught us better. It's dirty and painful to die for your country. When it comes to dying for your country, it's better not to die at all.